Thanks, Tom. My name is Ruth Rankin, and I'm the Senior Manager of Partner Management here at Roku. It's a great privilege to be presenting at this forum for the first time this year, as I've worked closely with many of you over the years. I'm here today to tell you about a variety of OS updates, developer dashboard improvements, and developer tools that we have introduced to the developer ecosystem over the past year since our last Developer Summit. I'll start by talking about some software updates, then I'll tell you about various enhancements we've made to the channel certification experience, and I'll leave you with some news on developer resources for additional knowledge. Given the constraints of this virtual format and the breadth of topics to cover, I will focus this presentation on quickly introducing you to these topics today. However, at the end of my presentation, I will let you know about a new webinar series we're spinning up, which will provide a greater level of technical insight into these topics and more. So be sure to tune into these for more information. I'm really excited to tell you about this first feature, as it is one of the most popularly requested features among our developer community, and that's exception handling in Roku OS. That's right, Roku OS 9.4 introduces exception handling to the BrightScript language. For our implementation, we utilize a try-catch methodology, which should be familiar to any developers who have experience working in language such as Java or Python. This approach has two main components, try-catch and throw. It works as follows. First, the statements when the try block are executed. If an exception occurs while those statements are executing, the try block stops and the catch block starts. BrightScript assigns an exception object to the variable named in the catch statement before running the code in that block. If no exception occurs, the try block runs to completion and nothing in the catch block runs. Within the catch block, an optional throw statement can propagate the exception back to the caller of the present code, which may be the system itself. Additionally, a throw statement can be used to pass an exception back to the caller. It's important to note that neither try nor catch are keywords in BrightScript and should be treated as reserved identifiers. Throw, on the other hand, is reserved as a keyword, so it is important that legacy channel code, which already employs try and catch as ordinary identifiers, should be rewritten to use the different identifiers instead. Before we move on, let's take a look at a quick and simple example. In the example here, the first thing that happens is we set some variable, errordiv0, to Roku's system error code for divided by 0, which happens to be 20. Next, the code in the try block will execute some command that might fail. If it succeeds, the function ends, and catch is skipped. But if an exception is raised, then the catch block executes, and the if statement checks the exception object to see if it is something that can be handled. In our case, there is only one exception that can be handled, which is if the error code matches the system's code for division by 0, in which case a print statement would be displayed in the console. For any other exception, the function would rethrow the exception to be handled by another enclosing try-catch or by the BrightScript runtime. Naturally, there is much to say about this exciting new feature, and we'll be getting into the various use cases during a dedicated webinar specifically on this topic in early December, so mark your calendars. Another new highly requested feature we introduced this year was our automated channel testing software. Collectively, this suite of software enables developers to automate and scale their QA and channel certification testing during development and before submitting a channel for publishing. Specifically, this software allows developers to conduct state-driven UI testing across multiple devices simultaneously. There are three main components to our automation software suite. First, there are Selenium-based WebDriver APIs which can be used for automating channel behavior. These WebDriver APIs talk to an HTTP server, which in turn converts the command into an ECP command native to the Roku environment. The ECP inputs to the device then drive the behavior of the Roku device. An XML representation of the command status is then passed from the Roku device back to the ECP client and HTTP server, which ultimately passes the command status as JSON data to a test framework. Which brings me to our second component. Our automation software suite includes Roku instances of the robot framework and JavaScript libraries. These libraries serve as keyword-driven mechanisms to create, run, log, and record channel tests. Additionally, developers can also write their own testing framework as well if they'd like to work in languages other than Robot or JavaScript. Finally, the third component to the automation software suite is a Postman collection service, which is used to test Roku WebDriver APIs and write test suites. More information about this software suite can be found on the developer site, including robust documentation and a demo tutorial. The final feature I am going to showcase today on the software side of things is around our platform support for Trickplay thumbnails. Trickplay is the term for little content preview thumbnails that appear above the timestamp scrubber when a user fast forwards or rewinds content. In fact, many of you are likely already familiar with this feature just from your own personal use on the platform. Historically, Roku has used a proprietary media format known as BIF to implement Trickplay thumbnails. However, as of Roku OS 9.3, Roku now supports industry standard implementations of the -IF standard and the HLS thumbnail sheets. This additional platform support of Dash and HLS thumbnails is intended to enable developers to implement Trickplay in their channels with the same media assets that they've already created as part of their existing media transcoding processes. While support for these media types was first added in Roku OS 9.3, we are pleased to announce that Roku OS 9.4 resolves a bug which was causing timestamp offsets to occur and compound on content with ad inserted server-side. So developers that previously experienced this issue will find that Trickplay thumbnails will stay in sync to the timestamp of the content as of Roku OS 9.4, assuming the Dash or HLS standards have been followed. As my colleague Wendy will discuss in the next session, support for Trickplay thumbnails is required on all content 15 minutes or longer. However, to make this implementation easier, we've introduced tools that help publishers generate these thumbnails from either HLS or Dash streams. These tools can be found in the developer documentation and on the Roku Dev GitHub account. Now that we've covered all of the major developer updates on the software side, I'd like to shift gears and talk about some of the improvements we made in the developer dashboard itself. Specifically, I'd like to take a look at what we've done to streamline the channel certification experience. Roku has been making investments to move toward a self-service channel certification model, which we believe puts more power in the developer's hands and gives them end-to-end control over when the channel is published. Through this self-service model, developers receive their certification results instantly or within minutes, which results in less downtime while waiting for the results of manual certification testing to come back. Of course, this reduced downtime results in faster time to market, and ultimately allows you to schedule the exact time and date for your channel to be published, assuming it passes certification testing. Today, these tools are only available to a subset of channels, but developers can expect to see us continue to move in this direction, automating more and more of the certification testing and publishing experience and making these tools available to more and more channel partners over time. Let me walk you through the specific features we've introduced to the channel publishing experience in the developer dashboard. First, we've added a publishing scheduler tool, which allows you to set the time and date that your channel will be published to the channel store if it passes its automated certification tests. Second, as part of this switch, we've made it mandatory for a channel to pass a set of tests run by the static analysis tool. For anyone who doesn't know, the static analysis tool is a tool embedded in the channel submission process that scans through the code of a channel in order to detect possible errors or certification violations in the code itself. The tests that we've made mandatory to comply through the static analysis tool are the same tests that we've always run manually behind the scenes, so automating this process within the developer dashboard itself simply removes the downtime inherent to manual testing and provides the developer with certification feedback immediately. While static analysis has been available for years now, we also added a new tool to the publishing flow in July for testing channel behavior and performance. Whereas the static analysis tool scans through code statically to detect errors, this new channel behavior analysis tool actually launches a channel on a real Roku device in the Roku cloud and runs automated performance and operational tests within the channel. Finally, in addition to these automation tools, we've added a standardized screen for entering deep linking parameters, and will soon be adding a similar screen for capturing channel authentication credentials. Currently, these screens are just used to standardize the forms in which partners submit this information to Roku, but longer term, we may use this information to further automate the certification testing and publishing process. We thought the best way to show you how these features work is to actually just play a little video demo that we prepared. So here you see the UI of the developer dashboard, and we're just uploading a channel package. You then land on the static analysis page. You should be familiar with this page by now if you're an experienced developer. You just go ahead and click Analyze, and you'll just have to wait a couple of seconds for your results to come back. In the meantime, we'll go over to the deep linking page that I alluded to earlier. Here you'll see that we've introduced dedicated fields for providing us with information such as media type and content ID. You can also enter when the content is expected to expire or be removed from your channel, and you can enter a human-readable title for easy reference later. Next, we go to the test credentials page. Again, there are fields for entering the credentials title and to give it a human-readable description. You'll enter a username and corresponding password, and you'll also be asked to indicate whether this is an SVOD or cable/satellite channel, which generally informs Roku what to expect from the login UX. Again, you can set a date when this account may stop having access to the channel. As mentioned earlier, this authentication credentials page is not available in production yet, but we do plan on rolling it out before the end of the year. So you can expect to see this page become available in the developer dashboard shortly. The certification testing screen was introduced in July and is used to test the actual behavior and performance of your channel. You'll see here that once we run the testing tool, we're given a place in queue and we can watch real time as test cases run on Roku devices in the cloud. As tests are completed, we see the results come in real time as well. The results of these tests are purely informational for the developer today and will not block the publication of your channel through our self-service tools, but we do intend on making compliance mandatory in the future, similar to what we've done with static analysis. Speaking of static analysis, if we revisit that page now that some time has passed, you'll see we have our results. While there are some warnings, there are no errors, which mean we've passed testing and we will not be blocked from publishing this channel. If static analysis had detected any errors, we would not be able to schedule a time for publishing. Finally, now that we've passed static analysis testing and provided all other required information, you'll notice the Schedule Publishing button, which in the past used to say Submit for Publishing. That's because this button is now a scheduling widget that allows us to specify the date and time when we want the channel to auto-publish to the channel store. As a reminder, this is only available to a subset of channels today and will be rolling out more broadly over time. So that concludes all of the tangible enhancements to the developer ecosystem that we plan to show you today. But before I open things up for Q&A, I would just like to call attention quickly to some additional resources we've added to our various knowledge bases in order to make onboarding and developer knowledge more accessible and scalable. First, we recently launched a series of 13 sequential educational videos intended on showing a developer with no Roku development knowledge at all how to build a Roku channel. It is our hope that these series will help new Roku developers come up to speed quickly, and we encourage you all to consider incorporating this video series into your company onboarding materials for new Roku developers that join your team. However, as excited we are about the video series, we're also excited about the delivery mechanism. As part of this rollout, we have launched a Roku Developers video channel on YouTube and a dedicated channel in the Roku channel store that can be downloaded and run on a Roku device. Of course, the videos can also be watched from within our developer website. We will continue to invest in growing this educational video catalog, so I strongly encourage everyone in the audience to go to YouTube right now and subscribe to the Roku Developers channel in order to stay notified whenever new content is uploaded. You can reach the YouTube channel by navigating to this URL or by searching for Roku Developers on YouTube. Finally, as I mentioned at the beginning of my time with you, we are pleased to announce today that we'll be kicking off an ongoing webinar series that will address a wide range of technical, product, and business topics. Functionally, these webinars will be broadcast virtually, much like today's summit, and will be driven by Roku engineers and other subject matter experts. In each webinar, we'll present an overview of the topic, walk through a live implementation demo so folks understand the relevant best practices, and close with real-time audience Q&A. So I'll leave you with this calendar of initial webinars we have planned for the series. We will start with a two-part series on how to use the BrightScript profiler for channel optimization. The first session will cover how to use the profiler to capture CPU and memory data during a channel session, and the second session will focus on how to analyze the data. Then, in early December, we will host a focus session all about exception handling on the Roku platform, which will go into much greater detail than I went moments ago. Finally, in mid-December, we are planning another session focused on Trickplay implementation and complying with the related certification requirement. Please note that these dates are subject to change, so be sure to check Roku Developer blog as dates draw near to confirm they are still taking place as scheduled. Longer term, we will add a dedicated page to the developer site specifically to showcase the schedule of upcoming events within the developer community, which will include these webinars. That concludes our overview of the latest additions to the developer ecosystem. With that, I will now open things up for questions, where I will be joined by some of the engineers and product managers who help build these various tools that I've discussed in my presentation.
Clive Jones, Senior System Software Engineer from our team. Clive, do you want to go ahead and unmute yourself? There you are.
Hi, I'm unmuted.
Excellent. All right. So we do actually have a question about exception handling here, Clive. I saw you addressed the question in Zoom, but let's go ahead and ask it for the broader audience. So the question was from Mate Zizlanka. Hope I'm pronouncing that right, Mate. The question is, if an exception is thrown and is not catched, will it crash the app?
Yes. In the same way as the moment if you tried to access a method on something that was uninitialized, or you divided by 0 or whatever, and that will crash your app. If you explicitly throw something, that will also crash the app. However, as well as throw, we have the try-catch mechanism that can catch errors that you define. It can also catch any errors that occur because of runtime problems, all of the existing categories of runtime error.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you, Clive. So we also have a question again from Tim Lee. And this one's about automation support. And it'll go to Robert Burdick, who is also on the line with us. Robert, for those of you who do not know him, is our Director of Developer Platform. So Robert, the question is regarding automation support. Tim is curious if there will be support for an extensible ECP command, something like a custom endpoint with the ability to pass one or more parameters, or alternatively, if there will be custom RO input command.
So we already do support RO input in order to do things like deep linking testing with the solution, and you could, I believe, if you wanted to use that for any other input parameters, like to do other control of your channel that wasn't specifically for deep linking, I believe you could do that. But in terms of like a custom or a specific custom ECP command itself, there's nothing in the works for that.
Okay. All right. So Matt Hardwick, just so you know, we'll actually answer your question here in just a little bit about exemptions from the certification process. So we have a couple questions. I'll actually take this one. So we have a couple questions from the audience coming in about APIs to submit a channel through the developer dashboard. This is a feature we've noted year over year. We're tracking it. It's not currently on our roadmap, but we are aware that you guys are asking for it. So just know that we hear you on that front. So George Cook from our community is asking a really interesting question, Clive, and it's around how is exception info being handled in crash reports?
If there's a crash report, then you will see the information about the nature of the exception. When you throw something, you can give an error number, you can give an error textual error message. Those will both appear in the crash dump.
Oh, okay, awesome. So Chris is asking, can we look forward to getting a list of local variables in the catches like we do for existing crash logs we get over email?
If there is a crash, then if there's a crash because of a throw that was not caught, you will see all the same information that you would see if there was a BrightScript runtime error. We can go into some in more detail in questions and answers on the webinar in December, but if you catch an exception, then at that point the local variables at the point where the exception occurred are lost by that point, but you do get to see the full backtrace of where the exception occurred.
Okay, that's super useful. So lots of questions here about exception handling. One is coming in from Steve Keen, and he's asking if conditional compilation can be used within a try-catch block.
I assume that's so that you can put the try-catch there and exclude it in for earlier versions. That is a good question, and I can't see why you couldn't do that, but I confess I've never tried it.
Maybe
I will
that's
be trying it after this.
Yeah, maybe that's something we can test out between now and the webinar session in December.
Sure. Yeah, it seems plausible.
So another question is, if an exception is thrown on a thread, will this go through the main thread for handling, or would it crash the application?
You will need a try-catch block protecting each thread in your program to catch exceptions in that thread.
Okay. And this is a bit of an open-ended question, but I'm interested in seeing where it goes. So Matt Hardwick from Disney Streaming Services is asking how the performance of exception handling will go on low-end devices, like maybe a Tyler, for example, and if that's something we've tested out.
In the case where if you put a try-catch block in and there is no exception, that's really quick. It's almost as quick as a for next loop. It's considerably quicker than a function call. If there is an exception that's caught, then that's considerably slower, but you're in a situation where we just saved you from the application crashing, and it taking a little while to handle that is fine.
Right. Okay, so George is actually following up on Steve Keen's question from earlier. He's asking if there are any ramifications on performance. Clive, just to elaborate on that a little bit, sorry, I was sort of reading the question as I was reading it out loud to you. I think some of the questions as well, so in a dev environment, are there any considerations for performance as well? So we know we're good to go in prod, but are there any impacts in dev?
Implications in dev, as in while developing, or?
So George, if you want to actually go ahead and raise your hand, it seems like this might be a question that you want to expand on. Here we go. So we're going to try this for the first time today. That's exciting. So George, here we go. You are live and you can talk now. Hopefully. Oh, let me actually. So I see. So George, you're going to have to go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
There we go. Yes.
Yeah, what I just wanted to ask, other than saying thank you so much, and we're so happy we've got this feature, it's just on some other platforms, for example, on iOS, you have assertions which you can use during development, but you strip them out in prod. And that's, I think, what Stephen Keen was alluding to, which is, is try-catch something we'd want to take out of our prod apps? And it sounds like you've almost answered this. It sounds like just use it defensively. Don't rely on it for logic, basically.
Oh, absolutely leave it in the live code. It's very quick. It's very quick to do try catch when there isn't an exception, and when there is an exception, it saves you. So cool. It's intended. It's intended to be very fast.
I'm so glad to hear. So I'm hearing it's there. Don't rely on it firing constantly. Obviously, don't just throw caution to the wind and just rely on throwing exceptions all over the place. But the safety net's safe to use.
It's throwing. In benchmarking, you can throw several thousand exceptions a second on a slow platform, but don't.
Yeah, I hope you're not judging my code there, Clive.
It's not slow, but it's not nearly as fast as the path where you don't catch an exception.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. That answers my question.
Awesome. So I have a question here from Kumar, and I'm going to direct this to you, Robert. It's not a topic we covered in this session per se, but I think it's relevant. So the question is around if there's plans to make stack traces available in the crash logs in the developer dashboard. And correct me if I'm wrong, but they should be available today. Robert, do you know if you can expand on that?
There's already an existing feature in the portal, and it's been there for some time.
Thought so. So Kumar, if you want, I can reach out to you. What I'll do is I'll reach out to you after the summit and we'll show you how to get those. Thanks, Robert. Okay, so the questions are dying down here a little bit, and we are at time, so that works well. Thank you to all the panelists for joining. I think it's clear there's some excitement in the community about exception handling, and we're really excited for that. We'll work on getting some of these answers and doing a little bit more testing in prod before the webinar in December, so we can answer those questions then and address them more fully. With that, thank you, panelists, for joining. You guys can head on your way. And so we're now going to turn things over to our first break of the day. So you guys can get up, stretch your legs, grab another cup of coffee, and we will reconvene here at 10:20. So we'll see you guys then. Thanks.